Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemaphilepod.com. Jackie Shane was one of music's pioneering black trans performers. On the edge of stardom, why did she disappear? Any other way, the Jackie Shane story hands the mic over, revealing her extraordinary journey in her own unmistakable voice. Amazing documentary film called Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story. We're joined today by the co-directors of this wonderful film, Michael Mabbott and Lucah Rosenberg. Welcome to Cinemophile.
Thank you so much.
Mike.
It does appear that her career was one of more or less flying under the radar, at least from my perspective. I'll start with you, Lucah. How did you know about Jackie? How did you learn about her and her life?
So I heard about her from Michael, and he said, making this film, and have you ever heard of Jackie Shane? I said no, and it was surprising to me because I thought I knew a lot of Black trans history and a lot of Black trans public figures, but I hadn't. And it's obviously part of that is because of the erasure and, the things that have happened in her life, which we explore in the film. But that was the first time that I had exposure to the story. And then as I heard more and more about it, I was like, this is the exact type of stuff that I want to be making. I'm a Black trans person. One of my first films was called Passing. It was about my experience being Black and trans and people not knowing that I was trans and sort of what that experience is like. So to me, it was just a very interesting story to dive into and exciting.
But in exploring that a little bit on a sort of a level of how surprised you were to hear about her, sort of articulate what it felt like to not know her from before this.
I mean, I think there was a few things going on, like to not know about her. I mean, it brings up a lot of questions. Why? Which we do explore in the film. Why did we not know about her? How many stories do we not know? I mean, but as a person who knows about what happens to Black trans people, I wasn't totally surprised. Like, I think there's a surprise factor, but there's also, of course, we wouldn't know in some ways. And then as we dived in deeper into her family story, which is also what got me really excited about making the film, because one of my first questions to Michael was, well, how do you get erased from a family? And so that was something that I wanted to really get my head around and then be able to convey in this film, which was, well, if you have a family who at one point has an issue with who you are and you have been missing for 45 years, then future generations will not know who you are. And I know a lot of Black trans people who are separated from their families. And so to me, the fact that this other generation wanted to come back and say, yes, like we need to support this person. We need to up level their legacy. We need to, bring them back into the fold was something that I thought people needed to hear, but especially other Black trans people who might feel like I'll never have that. I'll never be able to have a family that loves and cares about me. So from that perspective, that part of the story was quite interesting to me.
Michael Mabbott, in terms of your journey, getting to know the life story behind Jackie Shane, where did that begin?
Well, it began with Jackie's extraordinary live album, Jackie Shane Live, which was recorded in Toronto, my hometown, in the mid-'60s. And about 12 years ago, somebody gave me a bootleg of that album. I'd never heard of Jackie and never heard the album. And I put this album on my record player, and it just knocked my socks off. It was one of those incredibly rare albums. I've experienced it with like Ziggy Stardust and some Dylan, but those albums where the person is talking right to you. It was an incredibly intimate experience. It felt like I was in this room with her when she was recording. It made me feel not alone. All of those wonderful things that music can do, that certain rare bits of music can do. I wanted to know more about this person. The fact that I hadn't heard of this person from my hometown kind of blew my mind. And, at the time, there wasn't a ton known, aside from she was a Black trans woman who disappeared in 1971. That was my introduction to it. And as a filmmaker, as a Toronto filmmaker, I was intrigued by this and wanted to know more about this extraordinary musician in my hometown. And so I would kind of look around every year, kind of poke around the internet to see if there was anything. And there was absolutely nothing aside from rumors that maybe she was alive or dead or murdered or drowned or, And then in 2016, it was announced that a record label was releasing all of her music and releasing it with her consent. So at that point, I knew that she was alive. It took me about another year of going through some people I knew, including a musical anthropologist, Rob Bowman, who was working on the reissue, was talking to Jackie, was interviewing Jackie for that. And at that time, Jackie was talking to very, very few people, but she did express through Rob that she wanted a film made about her and wanted to find the right filmmaker to do it with. And so between Rob and a gentleman named Jeremy Pender in the UK, I spent about a year going back and forth, passing on messages to Jackie through them. And after about a year of that, Jackie agreed to talk to me and gave me her number. I think I thought the first time I'd called her, if maybe I made my pitch about what her music meant to me and to my community and my city, that she might say, okay, let's do this. And that first conversation, she let me speak for a few minutes and made my pitch. And she was very gracious. And then she started talking and she spoke for 4.5 hours in that first time. At the end of it, I had no idea. I felt like I was high. It was just such an extraordinary conversation, but I had no idea whether she would do this film with me. And I asked if I could call her back the next week. And she said, okay. And I called her back the next week and the week after that and the week after that. Had these marathon conversations, like on average 5 hours long each one. And we spoke for, well over a year, for over 100 hours. She just unpacked her life and told me what a film about her life should look like and feel like. And it was like an education in art, talking with her, among many, many other things. And, you said she flew under the radar, and the sense of erasure is really intense and motivating. I think the urgency we felt to make this, because the more we found out from Jackie, and then of course we went to Nashville after she passed away and found her archive, and she kept everything, including, all of her schedules, all of her receipts for what she was getting paid for clubs, for the furs that she was buying, for her beautiful hotels that she was staying in. Jackie didn't fly under the radar. For those 10 years when she was a star in Toronto, she was a huge star. She was packing clubs. She was like on the charts, #2 hits. She wasn't under the radar, which made it that much more extraordinary that none of us had heard of her. You know what I mean? And I guess that much more urgent to tell this story.
What you said at the start of your answer is something very relatable to me, the discovery of an artist. As someone who loves music on the level that I think you and I share, it is so life affirming to hear a voice of someone that is that powerful. And her music is that powerful. What we hear in the film is one of the great soul R&B voices that I've ever heard. It's quite amazing. It's quite amazing and thank you for saying it that way, because she wasn't under the radar. She certainly lived her life in a way, with a boldness that is just hard to square with the era in which she grew up, going back. But when people see Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story, they'll know what I'm talking about. When you hear that live performance you hear in the film is jaw-dropping. It's something that you really, that voice. It's that voice that not only in the singing, but in the conversations that are the backbone, the interview that we hear her talking, it translates into the way she talks to someone else in the film. And so it's all of that. Well, let's go back. Let's do some of the let's anthropologically go back to the point where we began the film, where she started from. Lucah, talk a little bit about the history of Jackie Shane, where she came from and her circumstances early in life.
Yeah, so I mean, she was born in Nashville in 1940, the Jim Crow segregation. From a gender perspective, she knew that she was born in the wrong body at a very early age, even though there was no language around that. One thing that we learned while working on the film was that her biological mother couldn't raise her, and so her aunt was the one that raised her during this time in Nashville. And so from her early life, I mean, from what we gather, she was a pretty happy kid, although with very little language to talk about her gender experience. But luckily, her mother was incredibly supportive of her and, noticed from a very early age that she was, very feminine. So that was one part of the story that I really actually love so much is because, for so many people's trans experiences, it's so much based in like their family doesn't support them and their community doesn't support them. And one thing that we saw from Jackie, like as much as people may have, she was called a sissy as a little kid, or maybe didn't really get why she was so feminine, she still had a community and she still had friends and she was still given these opportunities and still was able to play on the stages and had the confidence to just let her musical talent shine at a time where otherwise, we look back at sort of segregation and it was like all doom and gloom. And yet one thing that really stood out to me when we were in Nashville was that like doing some of these interviews was that no, actually Jefferson Street, which was the black area of Nashville where all this music stuff was going on, Jimi Hendrix, Little Richard, was a very positive place, full of a lot of people who were getting started in their careers and being mentored by people, and they were having LGBT black parties, which is where she met Little Richard. So I think that it was for everything that was challenging about her upbringing and her early life, and obviously she left Nashville because it was racist and homophobic and transphobic and all those things. She was in an environment that in many ways allowed her to flourish for a good part of her early years.
She seemed to be, especially from what we see in the film, not afraid. She didn't seem fearful. I'm sure she was cautious and careful in some aspects of living in that environment, but left to her own devices, she seemed very confident in herself.
Mhm.
Is that a
Yeah,
fair assessment?
definitely.
Absolutely. When I first started talking with her, I think part of my interest was how did she become this courageous woman that she was in her adult life? And as Lucas said, she did have an extraordinary aunt who raised her, and I think who gave her strength and power and confidence. Um, Jackie was also just an extraordinary human being, from the time she was born, and
Yeah.
she was incredibly mature. She was connected to things that I'm certainly not, grounded in ways that were not typical of a young child. Adults were coming to her with their problems when she was a little kid because she had some understanding and she had something. So she was, I think, born that way in some ways, and then had the good fortune of having this aunt there. Part of what she did incredibly was navigate some really, really dangerous situations. And her motto was live and let live. And I continue to unpack that. Part of that applied to how she navigated these very difficult situations.
Yeah.
And she wasn't threatening to anybody. All she wanted to do was be herself. And she wasn't condemning. She wasn't even the people that were condemning her, she wouldn't condemn. She just was living her life. There was that helped her navigate some of these situations. And as much as she left Nashville for all the reasons Luca mentioned, very true. It was a dangerous place. It was also a small town. And part of the reason she left, and part of the reason why the musicians around her were encouraging her to leave, was she was so talented, and her talent was bigger than that town would let her be. So I think the almost positive version of why she left had
Mhm.
something like that, of like, if you have everything you need to become a big star, and this town is too small for you to do that in.
One of the things that strikes me in watching the film and assessing the different social and interpersonal things that she needed to navigate, she seemed to have been a high IQ of understanding human nature and what was available for. She just seemed very attuned to her environment, if you will. I don't know if I'm saying this very well, but
Definitely.
yeah, she
Uh,
did. And we'll get into her journey to Montreal. I want to talk about that because, again, another amazing part of her story. But there's one or two stories, and I loathe to give anything away, so I'm going to be careful here. But there is a point in the film in her career as a singer in which she would have had to make deals with some very dangerous people. And the way that she was able to navigate her way around that and move forward with her career is an amazing story. Amazing. That part of her story is, to me, I can't even imagine how I would have handled it, and the way that she did is amazing.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
100%.
I don't want to tip our hand too much or spoil anything, but I think what you're referring to is certainly in Montreal was it was a mobbed up city, and the mob
yes.
and ran it. Jackie was navigated that partially because she was incredibly intelligent, and incredibly observant. She was also incredibly talented, and the mob saw an incredibly talented musician and said, "This person can make money for the club." But there was an overriding thing that Jackie talked a lot about, which was her emotional IQ and the IQ of it being able to see the world in a certain way. And she saw people that were acting out against her and acting in evil ways. She saw them as people who were scared. And I think in all sorts of ways that might have helped her navigate, because she wasn't scared of these evil people because she saw them as cowards, you know?
Wow.
So her reaction to them wasn't to, get down to their level. It was to sort of feel sorry for these people, that they weren't in tune with themselves the way she was in tune with themselves. And so she could feel joy while they were feeling fear, and that was coming out in anger, aggression, racism, homophobia, transphobia, whatever. And I think that was one of her superpowers, is that she saw the world in a very empathetic way, and that the root cause of all this was fear. And I find that I need to be reminded of that myself every day, that other people are going through things, they're doing things that may come across as nasty to me. It's not about me, it's about them. And I think that allowed Jackie to not be angry all the time and help her navigate some of this. So
Well, I just want to remind our listeners we're talking with the co-directors, and that would be Michael Mabbott and Lucah Rosenberg, of this remarkable documentary film called Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane Story. And Lucah, I want to talk about the relatives who we see in the film discover their auntie. Is it? Yes. And that's very cool. And I don't know who staged all of the memorabilia in the film, but it's very cinematic. Whoever did that, you did a nice job of kind of giving us this. There's almost a ethereal sense of walking into that grouping of her, whatever, all the stuff that she had in her storage, in that storage bin. It lends this other kind of level to the reverence for her in her life.
I appreciate it. I mean, Michael and I, we came up with those concepts, and it did take us some thinking, because we didn't know exactly what we were going into, how much stuff there'd be and what exactly there'd be and how we would display things. And so we thought about it, and then kind of also had to work with what we had there, and just in the moment sort of letting flow state take over, and putting things in different places. But yeah, the family story is it's a really incredible part of it. And to see them, find, well, obviously we didn't see them find out about her, but to have them retell the story and how much it's impacted their lives has been really amazing. And one of my favorite parts of it is when we see everybody at the end come together in the space, because we didn't necessarily know that was going to happen. So we were doing the interviews, and they said, we've got some family to come. And we said, sounds good. And it was just this incredible moment, because she had felt, for the 45 years that she was missing, basically, that she was completely alone. Her mother was gone, her biological mother, her aunt was gone, her stepfather. And so to have this family now come in and celebrate this legacy, and to celebrate her existence, and to want to be a part of it, and want to see the past, basically, was really, really incredible. And I think I may have mentioned this, but I know a lot of trans people who really, really struggle with this idea of being accepted by their family. And so to me, it just really shows that, a few generations down, you might be in a situation where people want to know about you, and they want to be a part of your life. And so the way in which her nieces have embraced her, really just taken ownership of her legacy, has been really beautiful to watch. And it's a really nice part of the story. And it is unfortunate that she passed away. Michael was originally going to going to help on it, basically work on this project, sit for an interview even, right? And so in many ways it was very unfortunate that she passed away, but in some ways it opened up the story so much, because if she hadn't passed away, we wouldn't have met the nieces, they wouldn't have known about her. Obviously, like, I probably wouldn't have been involved in the project. A lot of the things that, the rotoscope that we used to bring her to life would have been very different. And so in many ways the film is what it is because she was not here to be present for it.
I'm sure she would have had something to say about it.
Yeah, well, yes, for sure, for sure.
I think about that all the time. I mean, I miss her so much. I miss her as a friend, as just somebody, as a teacher. We would have loved to have obviously gone down and meet her in person rather than over the phone. But my God, she would have had a lot to say. And that said, she had a lot to say in terms of guiding this and what this looks and sounds and feels like, both directly to me in terms of her discussions. She loved talking films. She loved films. We had basically a movie club where she would tell me a film and then I'd track it down. And these weren't all necessarily, ones you find on streamers or whatever. And she'd walk me through these films and explain why this works and how this could be like something we could do. Her wardrobe, like everything, was a guide. And anytime she talked about music, it was also talking about just art and how to do art. And so it was, she had a lot to say, but before she passed away, and I think we were very, very true to that. But my God, she would have had a lot to say.
As much as we've talked about her and her story, and I'm glad, Luca, you brought it up about the rotoscoping. That was a question I had for you in terms of how the filmmaking part of this. There's still a lot more to the story that we haven't talked about. So I want people to understand that there is a lot in this film about her life and her career and the circumstances and such. Well worth the time to check it out. The reaction of the family, people around her, people who knew her, who we see in the film. What's been the general feedback from them on the story?
We just had actually the Nashville premiere where we had all of her, the family and their friends and, multiple generations there. And a lot of them were sitting behind us. And it was pretty amazing to just hear the laughter and hear the crying. And just, as soon as it was over, they put their hands on Michael and I's shoulders and said they loved it. And I think that's what you want, because this was someone that they didn't get to know, that they wish that they did. And so for them to have this film and for them to feel connected to her and to feel like this did her life justice, and also has allowed their family to know more about their history, it was amazing. Their reaction, they've really, really embraced it.
Michael, anything else you want to add to that, or?
Their support throughout this has been incredible. And when Jackie passed away and they learned for the first time that they had this extraordinary aunt and they'd inherited this incredible archive, there was a lot of people coming after them to tell her story, to manage her estate, to do all sorts of things. And for a little while, the weasels kind of tried to get into the hen house. And this family, we went down couple months after Jackie passed away and met with all of the matriarchs of this family. And it felt like a version of meeting Jackie, like all of my conversations with her and then sitting with these three generations of women. It felt like sitting with a version of Jackie, and very kind, very, very smart. But because so many people were coming after them to make a film about Jackie, write a book about Jackie, release new records about Jackie, they were very, 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 very protective and very suspicious. That took some work for us to gain their trust. But I am so grateful that this family, that this is who's protecting Jackie's legacy currently and in the future. A big part of the story for us as Torontonians was Toronto was their adopted hometown. But last week, as I was literally getting on a plane to Nashville, it occurred to me that Nashville, she was born there and died there and started there. And so the people that we were screening this for, this meant something to them in a different way. And I got a little bit nervous, I have to say. And their reaction has been so emotional and so supportive and so strong There's a few things that have already happened because of this journey. One was last Friday, there was a historical plaque put up in Jefferson Street, a beautiful plaque for Jackie. The mayor turned out and a bunch of council people turned out and musicians turned out. This is what the family is doing, and this is what Jackie's story is starting to become and being recognized in more and more and more places. So
Wow.
Pretty extraordinary. I couldn't imagine better caretakers and warriors to be fighting for Jackie's legacy and than that family.
You use the word emotional, and it's an emotional film to watch. The story takes us to these places. Some of that emotional reaction is to hear the talent in her voice, and to see the way that she carried herself and the way she was as a performer, but in her life. But it's also the what if. There's always that. Like if she had a career, been able to flourish, it seems like to me like she was the kind of performer who would have continued to blossom, to be able to tap into that talent, that voice, and to be able to really make a mark. So that's part of it for me. That's the what if. For me is a lot of.
And the what if, Jackie was, up until the day she died, was talking about performing again. And,
Wow.
In our conversations, she'd have me like research different clubs or theaters in Toronto and how big is that? What's the capacity of that? Because she wanted to come out and play again. And her in that capacity, part of me was, what would her voice be like? What would her instrument be like? She was arranging all of that stuff back in the day. Like she was controlling this. And I when I saw Joni Mitchell perform in that most recent thing with Brandi Carlile, I was like, that's where Jackie would be at. The song would sound, she would still be communicating that emotion and that love and the blues and everything, because her phrasing was extraordinary. Her arrangement was extraordinary. It wouldn't have mattered what her voice was like, because she knew how to express things and connect with people. So the what ifs, I think about this all the time, which is part of the reason why, at the very least, it's some consolation that through this film, Jackie's music and image is now, and voice is now, on stages from, Korea to Nashville to all over the world. So at least we have that.
Well, to both of you, congratulations on just a wonderful documentary film. The film is Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story, as co-directors as well as co-writers, along with Allison Duke. It's just it's a beautiful film on lots of levels, and the rotoscoping I loved, and as a way of bringing her to life in a way, and in some ways, I don't know if it's called it elevating her image in some way, but it puts us in another space as we're watching her perform and the things that we see in the film. Just wonderfully done. Again, my hat's off to both of you for this terrific film.
Really appreciate it.
Again, we were speaking with the co-directors, Michael Mabbott and Lucah Rosenberg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.